Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Monster Gear, a progression fantasy series by D.M. Gilmore, narrated by Kirby Heyborne. Chapter 1. The game store stank of burnt cigarettes, even from just outside the glass door. The shelves filling it were lined with ancient game cartridges, their gray plastic casings long since starting to yellow. A wall on the far side was covered in hardware and systems, everything from some of the newest PlayStation and Xbox all the way back to the Atari 7800. There was even a vintage Pong cabinet from the heydays of arcades. The bell on the door rang as Spencer stepped in and tried to ignore the increasing stench of burnt tobacco. "Welcome to Al's Game Corner," came a voice from the back of the shop as a man with long gray-brown hair and a dirty Hawaiian shirt stepped out from the back room. He had what appeared to be a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, but when he noticed the kid in the doorway, he quickly scrambled to hide it. Spencer wrinkled his nose as the telltale scent of weed hit his nostrils. I'm Al. How can I help you, little dude?" the older man said, quickly clearing his throat. "Oh, hey, you new around here? I know most kids in this neighborhood by face, if not by name. Can't say I've seen you around." Spencer tightened his jaw and for a moment considered walking right back out of the shop. He didn't need to be here. He could go home and... He pushed the thought aside. Al's Game Corner was the only game shop for miles around this backwater town. He'd have to get used to this place sooner or later. Spencer wrinkled his nose again as he approached the counter and reached into the pocket of his gray hoodie jacket. A moment later, he extracted a long, rectangular device. It was clamshell in design and as wide as a typical phone, the blue shell worn by countless hours in sweaty hands. "We just moved in down the road," Spencer explained, setting the device on the counter between him and the smelly older man. "My DS is busted. Think you can fix it?" As Spencer pulled his hand away, Al blinked down at the device. It was an older Nintendo DS Lite system, one of the earlier generations of the device. He whistled as he picked it up with both hands and turned it over. "This doesn't look busted," Al muttered, carefully flipping open the handheld device. The hinges creaked ominously as one side came completely loose and dangled by a wire. He whistled quietly and shook his head. "I stand corrected." Spencer stuffed his hands into his hoodie pockets and looked away. His stomach twisted into a knot as Al fiddled with his device, turning it over in his hands as he searched for any other signs of damage. He muttered quietly to himself, then casually pinned his long hair behind his ears. He tapped his lips with a finger, eyeing the broken hinge, before scrunching up his face and setting the whole device down on the counter. "You know, little dude, these things are typically pretty durable. It takes a lot to break them." "Yep," Spencer grumbled. That was why the device had lasted so long. "I mean, really durable. You have to abuse them to get them to break like this." "Yep," Spencer agreed. "What, were you throwing it across the room, or—" Spencer shot the old man a withering glare and got a raised eyebrow in return. He let out a sigh and reached for his device, only for Al to pull it away again. Spencer clenched his jaw and looked away from the long-haired shop clerk, his gaze wandering to the glass window of the used game store, the only shop that sold video games at all in this entire god-forsaken town. As he contemplated exactly how much he wanted to tell this total stranger, Al snapped his fingers just as Spencer's mind was about to wander, bringing his attention back to him. "It broke in the move," Spencer finally explained. "The hinge has been kinda loose for a couple years. It just snapped in the box." "What, no protective case?" Spencer quietly stared at his feet. Al brushed aside his dirty gray hair as it again fell back in front of his face. He turned the device over in his hands one more time, then nodded sagely. "All right. Shouldn't be too hard to fix. Maybe a day. 2 at most if we get busy." Spencer looked up in surprise at the man. "That's it?" He tried not to sound too relieved, but he couldn't help but sigh a little. Al pulled a paper notepad out from under the counter and set it down next to the device. He casually fumbled a pen between his fingers before finally clicking it open and writing on the pad. "I'll need a special order the part. Getting the piece will be harder than putting it in the damned thing." Spencer couldn't even hide the relief on his face as he smiled at the old man. It was like a monstrous weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Sure, his old DS was a disgustingly out-of-date piece of hardware, and it hadn't seen a new game released in years, but it was the only game device he still had. He treasured the old thing more than anything else he owned, and the idea that it could have been broken... "That'll be $200 between parts and labor," Al said, scrawling on a pad in front of him. Spencer felt a lump form in his throat, and the color drained from his face. He knew that fixing his device wouldn't be cheap, but that was way more than he was expecting. "What do you mean, $200? It's a DS. They can't be that hard to fix." The old man pulled his hair away from his eyes again and blinked down at Spencer. Spencer met the man's bloodshot gaze, his fists clenched. "Listen, kid," Al muttered, carefully setting the pen down on the counter between them. "They stopped production on this model years ago. I mean, years ago. I can fix it, that's not the issue. The issue is getting the parts." "You said it would take a day, maybe 2, Spencer reminded him. "Did I?" Al blinked his bloodshot eyes and scratched his scraggly beard. "Let me rephrase. Once I get the parts, it'll be a day or 2. I have to get those orders in special, practically custom-made. That's extra for shipping and handling, not to mention that since these parts aren't exactly common anymore, they're typically a little more expensive." Spencer felt the anger bubbling up in him, could feel his fingernails digging into his palms. He took a deep breath and pushed the emotion aside. It wouldn't change the situation. It was just a game. No sense getting horribly worked up over it, right? All the same, he felt that lump in his throat grow heavier as he looked at the broken shell of his game system. He'd been working his way up to speed running an old platformer on the thing, and now he wouldn't be able to do that. With trembling fingers, he snatched the device off the counter. The hinge wobbled precariously, threatening to snap off completely. Carefully, he closed the device. "No deal, then?" Al asked, raising an eyebrow. Spencer shrugged and carefully slipped the device into the right pocket of his dark blue jeans. "Not something I can afford right now," he mumbled, tugging the gray hood over his wavy brown hair. Al nodded sagely before sitting down on an ash-stained stool behind the counter. "All right. I understand, kid. If you ever change your mind, I'll be right here." "Have a good one," Spencer muttered as he turned around to leave. As Spencer neared the exit, something caught his eye. It was a cardboard cutout for a game he had never heard of before. The cutout depicted a resplendent, 8-winged golden dragon as it did battle with a flame-cloaked demon. The surface was yellow with dust, but it otherwise struck Spencer as being a relatively new addition to the shop. Most of the other posters or displays were fraying at the edges, while this cutout looked like it had been set up just a couple of days ago. Written along the bottom in stylized text was the name of the game: Monster Gear. Al immediately noticed Spencer taking an interest in the cutout and stepped out from behind the counter to approach him. He took careful, deliberate steps as he neared. "What is this?" Spencer asked, looking over his shoulder at the older man. "I don't see any normal game developers listed on it anywhere, and I've never heard of Studio Aleph. Come to think of it, I've never heard of this at all. I'm usually in the loop with these things." "Not with this one you wouldn't be," Al chuckled. "This game technically hasn't even been announced yet." Spencer looked from the cutout to the clerk and back again, frowning. "Then why have an advertisement for it?" "It's in the alpha stages, and the publisher behind it is using Bertha Lake residents as a testing pool." Spencer wanted to snort out a laugh and mutter something about this backwater town being used to test a new video game, but his curiosity was getting the better of him. There was a new game to talk about. "What is it exactly?" "It's a geocaching augmented reality mobile game. You fight and tame monsters around town," Al said with a grin. "I've heard it's pretty good." "I've played those kinds of games before," Spencer said, his excitement waning. "They all get boring eventually. You just catch cartoon monsters with an endless supply of items you get from wandering town, and then you can see them through your phone and take selfies with them." Not in this game you don't. In this game you hunt down powerful monsters with your partner, and you command them in battle." Spencer's eyebrows perked up, and he looked at the cutout with renewed interest. Most augmented reality games were pretty boring, with very little substance to the actual gameplay. At most, combat was just tapping repeatedly on the screen. Spencer found that kind of gameplay to be tedious at best and annoying at worst. This monster gear, though, sounded a bit more interesting. Hunting monsters? Commanding a monster partner in battle? That could be pretty cool. And it wasn't like Spencer had anything better to do. The old man smirked and pointed at a QR code near the middle of the cutout, right between clashing effects of light and fire between the dueling dragon and demon. "Just scan this for a download link," he said before turning around and shuffling back behind the counter. Spencer reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. It was a sleek, almost state-of-the-art device in a thick blue protective case, and he could practically feel Al's eyes widening at the sight of it. He was thankful the older man wasn't asking any questions. He didn't think he was prepared to answer them. Not yet, at least. Spencer held up the device and scanned the QR code as instructed. There was a bit of lag as his phone desperately tried to connect to the internet before opting instead just to run off data. Finally, the App Store opened, revealing the logo for the game as well as a button to download it. "Your adventure begins now," Spencer muttered as he read the description for the game. He casually scrolled down the page to get a look at some screenshots. He saw pictures of monsters with stars and levels. "Oh, it has gotcha elements?" "A few. You can roll for random tamed monsters in the shop or unlock them through gameplay," Al confirmed as he shuffled back behind the counter. Spencer had seen other games try this formula before. You had monsters or heroes that you had to train, and you could spend money to get to higher ranks. Most of the time, these games were egregious microtransaction traps, which would force you to spend an ungodly amount of money in order to get a team of heroes or monsters suitable to take down the game's harder challenges. That's not to say all games were traps meant to separate players from their money. Some games in the genre did require genuine skill. Spencer didn't fail to notice that among the screenshots were no actual examples of gameplay, only pictures of a few different monsters and their respective stat screens. Spencer shrugged as he clicked the download button. He wasn't too interested in playing a mobile game since he didn't have the kind of money necessary to be good at them, but with his DS hanging on by a literal thread, there wasn't a whole lot else he could do with his free time. His mother had, after all, kept the PlayStation when they'd left. As soon as the thought appeared unbidden in Spencer's mind, he shoved it aside and tried to refocus himself. The lump in his throat from the sight of his broken DS only choked him more as his thoughts wandered to his mother. He took a deep breath and tried to focus instead on the game currently being installed on his phone. It wouldn't be the first time he played a mobile game. God knows there was so many it would be impossible not to find a couple that were interesting. He might even find that he liked it. The download took an awkward 5 minutes, during which time Spencer occupied himself by browsing the shop's shelves. Al kept a careful eye on him, noting that he checked his phone neurotically every few seconds just to see how far along the download was. The shop had a wide array of products that Spencer knew he could never afford. Everything from refurbished handheld game systems, which were each selling for less than the cost to repair his own, to old games from 3 console generations ago. Finally, Spencer's phone vibrated in his hand, indicating that the download had finished. Idly, his finger hovered over the app button for a moment, and he frowned. He didn't know why he was hesitating, just a feeling in his gut telling him he should carefully consider pressing the button. "It's just a game, kid. It's not life or death," Al called from behind the counter. He had a fresh cigarette on his lips, or was it the same joint from earlier? "Try to enjoy yourself. I swear you're wound more tightly than my brother." Spencer shot the clerk a glare before turning his attention back to the game and tapping the button. The game took a brief second to load before, finally, it opened. He was immediately greeted by a black screen with bright orange text. "Monster Gear uses your location for gameplay purposes. Please enable location data." As soon as he had finished reading it, a message box appeared, asking him to first turn on his phone's GPS settings and then allow Monster Gear to access it. Shrugging, he followed the instructions. The splash screen that followed looked much like the cardboard standee, with the same golden dragon fighting the fire demon and an orange loading bar filling along the bottom. It filled in a few seconds, and the splash screen was replaced by a map? Spencer stared in confusion at the map on his screen. It looked like a loosely defined 3D map of the town, in dark blues of all things, with a marker inside a building to indicate where he was. As far as he could tell, there were no buttons on the screen for him to press, just the map and the marker. For a brief second, he was about to shut the game down and open it again. It was in alpha, as the clerk said, so some bugs were bound to be expected. "Walk towards a portal to begin your journey." The orange text suddenly flashed along the top of the screen, startling Spencer. On cue, 6 dots of different color light appeared in various locations nearby. The map zoomed in on them one by one as they appeared before recentering on Spencer's indicator. Arrows in matching colors appeared along the edge of his screen to guide him towards the colored dots. "Red, blue, green, yellow, purple, and white," Spencer muttered as he rotated and zoomed out, looking at the various dots of light, the portals that had appeared. If the game worked the way he thought it did, Each one would represent a possible starter monster, something weak to help him learn the ropes. Well, if this is part of the tutorial, I might as well go along with it. Spencer waved goodbye to the clerk as he stepped out of the shop and headed towards the nearest portal on his map. Chapter 2. The closest portal to his location was the white one. It was half a block down from the used game store, in the space between two buildings. Some of the portals, like the red one or the blue one, were way too far away to even consider attempting. The red one looked like it was in a quarry just outside town, while the blue one was near the pharmaceutical company the town was built around. Both were out of the question. The yellow and green dots were a little closer, but the two closest dots were the white and purple ones. If Spencer wanted to get the best experience out of this new game, his best option would be to just jump in head first, get whatever starter monster it wanted to throw at him, and then work his way up to more powerful ones later on. He wouldn't know if he actually liked the game or not until he had a chance to experience the gameplay, after all. The fact that the game included geocaching elements helped a lot, too. It would be a great excuse to get him out of the house and exploring the town. There was even some part of him that was excited to see what kind of monster he'd get. Maybe he'd get that cool dragon from the standee, and probably not. There was no way that thing was a starter monster, but he could always hope. As he drew closer to the portal's location, the white dot on the game screen grew brighter. As he stepped between the buildings into what felt like a cross between a gravel driveway and an alley, the light on his map suddenly took on a more concrete shape. It grew into a ring of light, which pulsated as though in excitement. Spencer tapped on the swirling ring of light, the portal, as his indicator drew close to it. His phone vibrated in his hand as though feeling the energy of the portal. Is this the companion you choose? Yes or no? Spencer stared at the question for a moment, as though his answer should have been obvious. He wouldn't have walked this way if he'd wanted any of the other companions. Then again, his choice was solely made based on distance, not on any other factor. Whatever, I can always restart and pick something else later. With a shrug, he tapped yes. Suddenly, Spencer was presented with a small animation that depicted a person holding their phone out in front of them. The animated figure held their arm out perpendicular to the ground, the screen pointed away from them. Frowning, Spencer mirrored the gesture. A beam of iridescent rainbow-colored light suddenly shot from the screen of his phone and struck the empty air. Spencer was nearly blown backwards as the rainbow beam splintered space in front of him, cracks of brilliant white light pulsing through the air. The light quickly took the shape of a ring around the crack as it widened and grew near to the size of the alleyway. A blast of air nearly knocked Spencer off his feet, and he struggled to remain standing. Suddenly, the rainbow beam spewing from his phone grew taut and tugged on his grip. It was as though he were fishing and something had bitten on his line. He held his phone tightly in both hands, struggling to hold on to it. His shoulders strained from the effort, all thoughts of games forgotten as he desperately tried to maintain his grip. He pulled back as hard as he could, even as the tether of light tugged him forward. His feet slipped in the gravel, and he leaned back as he tried to counter it. Once, twice. On the third pull, he felt the tether of light give way as something was yanked right out of the portal. The gate slammed shut with a boom, sucking in all the air around it. This time Spencer fell forward as the air collapsed in on where the portal had been not a few seconds earlier. He hit the concrete, barely catching himself before face-planting. His phone, miraculously, hadn't been ripped out of his grip, and he realized with a start that his knuckles were hurting from gripping it so tightly.
"Oh, awesome!"
came a high-pitched voice from nearby. It sounded like it was standing right where that portal had been.
"Somebody finally summoned me again. I was scared that nobody would be interested in using me anymore, but here you are!"
Spencer took a deep breath, squeezed his eyes shut, and counted to 5. That must have been his phone, right? Just some special effects or something to get him excited about a new mobile game, right? He definitely had not just torn open a hole in time and space using his cell phone to call another creature from across the galaxy, right? Of course not. That would be crazy. Phone games didn't do stuff like that. Slowly, he opened his eyes and screamed.
"Hey ya, nobody!"
The little creature cheered, raising a hand in greeting. It was bipedal and almost reptilian in nature. It had pale gray skin and a shock of spiky white hair. A pair of horns, black in color and vaguely shaped like lightning bolts, stuck out from its hair. On each hand, it had a pair of thick fingers and a single thumb, each digit tipped with long, sharp claws. Similarly, its feet possessed 3 digits, though they were largely occupied by long claws that looked as though they could punch through brick. From where it was standing, Spencer could even see a tail wagging happily behind its back.
"Pleasure to meet you. I'm Zero, your new monster companion."
Spencer rubbed his eyes and blinked away dust, staring down at the tiny creature in shock and awe. Zero swayed patiently in place, smiling up at Spencer expectantly.
You, don't say a whole lot, do you?"
Zero asked, blinking his enormous silver eyes innocently.
"Nope,"
Spencer shouted, leaping to his feet and holding out a hand as though to ward the monster off.
"Nope, nope, nope, nope!"
Zero leapt in confusion as Spencer turned and power walked towards the alley exit.
"Wait, where are you going? We haven't finished the tutorial,"
Zero called.
"Nope, not dealing with this. Going home, uninstalling, rating 0 stars. I do not have the energy to deal with this right now,"
Spencer shouted, not looking back even as he stepped out of the alley.
But you can't leave yet,"
Zero protested, jogging to keep up with Spencer's brisk pace.
"We still have a whole tutorial to do, and monsters to hunt. The game's really fun if you give it a chance."
Spencer suddenly stopped at the mouth of the alley, and Zero ran face first into his leg. The little creature had to be no more than 2.5 feet tall. Spencer glanced down at it, his heart hammering in his chest. He really didn't want to deal with whatever this was right now. He wanted to go home, curl up into a ball in his bed, and forget that he had accidentally stumbled upon the unholy power of Satan, or whatever this was. That was when he noticed that Zero, whatever he might have been, was sniffling. Not smelling the air, not breathing through his nose, sniffling. Spencer recognized the sound too well. He'd spent the last few months in and out of that state himself. He bit his lower lip and looked down at the little creature who was sitting on his butt. His eyes were squeezed shut, and his face was turned down as though he were trying to hide. He sobbed once and quickly wiped his eyes. Spencer still really didn't want to deal with this right now, but seeing Zero try very hard not to cry, it was too familiar, too painful. The little whatever he was had been through a lot. Spencer could at least, if anything, be sympathetic to that, right? Sighing, he knelt next to the little monster. Your name is Zero, right? He asked, trying his best to keep his voice calm. Internally, though, his mind was reeling. Was he really about to try?
Sample complete. Ready to continue?